Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, Episode 33.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 33 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Today's sponsors are Liberty Maniacs, the design and merchandise company that celebrates freedom and has a bit of fun with those that don't. You can get my favorite t-shirt from them, the NSA, Only Agency of Government That Listens. Liberty Maniacs was sued for creating that shirt by the NSA, and Liberty Maniacs won. So head over to the show notes page. You'll find a link to their website. You can also find some other really cool Pro 2A shirts and merchandise. Audible has an affiliate relationship with the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. If you subscribe through our link, you get a free trial, 2 free books, and lots of pro-gun books on there. So you can get More Guns, Less Crime, Monster Hunter International, Gift of Fear, and a lot of other books that were mentioned during the interviews on this show. And, of course, if you use the Amazon search bars on the show notes page, you help out the show at no additional cost to yourself. Either the items we have linked there or anything you buy on Amazon that day helps us cover the cost of editing and hosting this show. Today's guest is Tony Rockamora. Tony is a New Jersey libertarian, firearms owner, and the host of the Don't Waste Your Hate podcast. And now, here's Tony.
Tony Rockamora, welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing, James? Thanks for having me.
Oh, great, thanks. Good to have you. So, Tony, you're the host of the Don't Waste Your Hate podcast. Would you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, actually, myself and my friend Jeff, who you can follow on Twitter at InvalidBeard. He's pretty active on Twitter for us with the show. And basically the show is pretty casual, conversational style. But the point of it is, the title "Don't Waste Your Hate" is that it kind of means that there's a lot of anger and frustration going on in the world, but a lot of people are angry at the wrong people. For example, all these lefty SJW types are angry at who they consider like right-wing bigots. But a lot of their problems might stem, in fact, from bad government policies that keep certain minority groups down, for example. So a lot of the show, it's not all about politics, but we're libertarians, so we tend to take aim at the government quite a bit. But, a lot of times we talk about culture as well and just different things going on in, whether it's local. We're from Jersey, so we do talk New Jersey stuff, but we also we go to the national level and beyond. So, it's kind of just a show where we kind of flesh out different issues that are going on, and a lot of times we end up coming to the conclusion that most of the people who are all up in arms about something tend to be getting it wrong in one way or another. So that's kind of the basic gist of the show. It's very casual. I wouldn't listen with your kids. We do use some bad language from time to time, but it's a fun show. We have a lot of guests on every once in a while, so it's a fun time. So you can check that out at don'twasteyourhate.com.
Great. And you, like you said, you live in New Jersey, and you're also a firearms owner. And could you tell us a little bit about being a gun owner in New Jersey?
Yeah. Well, as you know, it's not easy compared to the rest of the country, where we have one of the strictest, gun law areas in the country. So it's not easy. My personal story about it, I guess, is I don't come from a family that is, big in gun culture. My family are mostly Italian immigrants, so they came from Italy right into the cities over here. So they either were in New York or Newark or Elizabeth, and then that was maybe 2 generations ago, and then from there right to the suburbs. so there's not a lot of, I guess, hunting culture in my family. And in New Jersey, there is a fair amount of hunting culture, I would say, a little bit more into the rural areas in the West and the South. But if you're kind of in that New York metro area, you know, if your family probably just went straight from the city to the suburbs. So in my case, you know, my father, not really a hunter. You know, he did as a kid once in a while with his friends, but never really got me into hunting. You know, so I was not brought up in a gun culture, let's say. What I would say got me into guns, and I'm not really like a gun enthusiast, honestly. I'm not a firearms enthusiast. I kind of see it more as a duty to, you know, protect my home and my family, to own a firearm, rather than something that I really love to do or like I'm enthusiastic about. It's kind of just like, hey, if I don't do this, then, you know, what I'm kind of leaving myself vulnerable, and, you know, I just don't see that as a responsible way to be. So that's basically where I'm at as far as the firearms thing.
Sure, yeah, and that's really how they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be a tool, and I mean, it's fun for some of us to kind of really get into the different models and techniques that are out there, but it really is a tool to protect your life and your liberty. So you're also a libertarian. Would you tell my listeners a little bit about that and maybe how that can help them in their quest to preserve firearms rights?
Right. So, I mean, the basic axiom that many libertarians go by is something called the non-aggression principle. So basically it means that it's based on what we call self-ownership and private property, meaning the first order of business, I guess, is that you own yourself, you own your body. So part of that, as it relates to gun rights, would be you have the right to protect yourself and protect the body that you own. And then that extends to your family, etc. So that's kind of the basis of libertarianism in a philosophical sense. You own yourself, and you take it to its logical conclusion, and it seems like a very simple starting point, but if you take it to its logical conclusion, it has a lot of implications. And there is a lot of overlap, I would say, between small government conservatives and libertarians, but I would say that there are some areas where conservatives deviate or libertarians deviate depending on where you're coming from, and maybe that's where some of the misunderstandings lie. And I think that's the same with progressives. I think progressives have certain things that they say that sound libertarian, but then when you get down to their reasoning, it actually is not coming from the same place of personal liberty and self-ownership. So I guess that's kind of the basis of libertarianism in very, very basic terms. But I mean, if you want to talk specific issues, I mean, I'm happy to get into it and maybe be able to explain the libertarian position a little more clearly.
Yeah, well, how about, you know, since it's mostly firearms people listening, how about libertarian views on firearms?
Right. So I think the libertarian view on firearms would be that essentially there should be no firearms restrictions whatsoever. The idea goes back to the founding of the country, which is a very libertarian, was a very libertarian movement as far as that goes. It was a movement, as I'm sure most of your listeners are well aware, to throw off the yoke of British tyranny, right?
Right.
So this is very libertarian. This is people saying, hey, like, you know, you don't have the right to rule over us. We have a right to determine our own future, and, you know, it was about taxation specifically in this, which kind of was the catalyst for the revolution. But, you know, it was also, I think the Brits were trying to, you know, enforce their will upon us, upon some of the colonists, not us. I wasn't here, obviously, but and I think there was even some issues where they were trying to restrict people's ability to arm themselves. So, you know, I think that was a very libertarian revolution, let's say. It was a revolution where people were, they wanted, then that's why they put it in the Constitution, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. The point of it is not to go hunting. The point of it is to be able to defend yourself. And it's not even really to defend yourself against criminals. I mean, yes, that's part of it. But the real thing is to defend yourself against those who would say that they rule over you. And if they go too far and become a tyrannical government, that you have some recourse and you're able to stop them if they overstep. That's the real thing. And that is the libertarian position. It's that that gun ownership and that right to defend yourself, that right to bear arms is ultimately for that worst case scenario when your government goes too far and you need to step in and defend yourself.
And that's all based on that principle of self-ownership, that because you own yourself, you own what you produce and the property you acquire, and there shouldn't be restrictions on that. And that's the genesis of libertarians defending firearms rights, and then also to defend your liberty from tyrannical governments.
Exactly. And I think a lot of the difference, a lot of the, I'm not very, I don't follow the gun rights movement, I guess you could say, super closely. I see it from a peripheral view, but I would say from what I've observed, a lot of the failures of the Second Amendment people has been not concentrating on the real matter, the real truth of the matter, which is that ultimate right to bear arms is because of a tyrannical government. I mean, that's the reason that it was put in place. And it's a lot of people in the past, I think, have taken a step back because they've been more concentrated on, this is our culture and this is we want to hunt and home defense. And while those are noble goals, and I know people are passionate about them, the true passion should be that, hey, it is about self-ownership. It's about defending myself from any and all threats, up to and including that ultimate threat of government overreach and basically government imposing force and coercion on an individual. And because an individual should always be able to, because they own themselves, defend themselves. And I think that would be something that should be the focus of the gun rights advocates. Should be that we're defending ourselves not only against criminals, not only do we want our firearms in order to go hunting. It is really that ultimate against that tyrannical government.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and so what? I mean, you said you didn't grow up in a gun culture, but you found libertarianism. What was the catalyst that made you walk into a gun store and say, I'm gonna take up firearms for self-defense?
Yeah, well, I got into libertarianism, I guess, a little over 10 years ago now. It would have been during the election when Barack Obama first became president. So it was right before that, during the Republican primaries. That's when I was introduced to Ron Paul, and from there I really got into the libertarian philosophy stuff. And a big part of the libertarian philosophy, as we've said, is self-ownership, and the extension of that logically is self-defense. So I was ever since that point, I realized, hey, a lot of libertarians are gun rights advocates, and before that, I hadn't even thought of it, honestly. Like I said, I didn't grow up in it, so there was never really a need. Not that I hadn't shot a gun. I mean, I shot a few pistols here and there with one of my uncles when we went camping, things like that, but very minimal exposure. So it was learning about libertarianism that got it in my head that, hey, it is my duty to defend myself, and when I do have a wife and a family, that's that's what I have to do. That's what, and not only me, I have to have my wife understand how to use the gun and all that as well. So I had that seed planted maybe 10 years ago, but it really wasn't until I got out of college and then eventually was after I got married. Then that's when it really it was kind of like a kick in the butt, so to speak. And I said, okay, now I really have to do this. I can't wait any longer because, I have a wife and, in the future, hopefully a family to protect. So that was the actual impetus for me to go ahead and start getting into it and walk into the gun store, buy my first handgun. And, and then, of course, in New Jersey, you get to then interact with the state. So that was the negative part of it. And as a libertarian, of course, I am trying at all costs to avoid any interaction with any government official because it's just it's kind of like the worst nightmare of people who are small government people,
Yeah, yep. And so that must have really reinforced your libertarian beliefs when you go through that process where you walked into and depending on what town you're in, I know certain towns were being really taking liberties isn't the right word, but taking liberties with how they applied the firearms application process and requiring tests and letters from family members and all kinds of special requirements. So I imagine that really reinforced your libertarian position.
Of course, especially knowing, with the advent of the internet, I've grown up essentially with the internet most of my life. I mean, I think I was we got our first computer, I was 11, 12. So, I mean, I've been on the internet all of my adult life. So with the internet, you can very easily look around and see, what's going on in Pennsylvania, what's going on in Florida or Kansas or Texas or all these other states that have, much more, I guess you could say, liberal in the sense of free gun policies. You can do a lot more in a lot of these other states. And New Jersey is one of the strictest. Maybe California and a few other New England states might be a little bit more, but I mean, we're right there. So, it's when you have to then go interact with these local governments and the local governments are usually better than state and federal because they're closer to home, so they tend to respect you a little bit more because they're right in your face all the time. But even when you have to interact with local government officials, it's very it's very frustrating. And in New Jersey, you have to just to get a permit to purchase a handgun, you have to pay a fee, and it's annoying. And then they make you wait too. You have to fill out all the paperwork. You have to go get your fingerprints. They put your fingerprints on file. So it's it's a several day process. And I think it might have taken 30 days or so. I can't remember. It was several years back, but just to get them to approve it. And during that process, you have to give 3 references. I mean, at least in the town that I was in, I had to give 3 references, and they had to call all these references and ask about my character as a human being, and all these questions they have to ask, to your friends or family or whoever you put down, previous employer or whatever. And then once they approve it, then you only have 90 days to go get one handgun. And then you have to go through that process every time. Every time you want to get a handgun legally, you have to go through that process. And at the time, like I said, it was $2 to do this. So, okay, fine. $2, it's not really an imposition on most people, But our governor, Phil Murphy, who is very, very progressive, he just recently, we talked about it right before we started the show, he recently proposed, I don't know if this has been passed yet, but he proposed a very drastic increase in all the fees related to firearms, whether it's handgun purchasing, whether it's getting a carry permit, which is essentially impossible in New Jersey anyway. They have the process, but I mean, unless I've heard stories about people who could prove that they were under imminent threat of physical attack, and they've been denied by a judge. So it's impossible anyway, pretty much, unless you have some kind of political connections. But even still, that used to be a $50 fee. or maybe it still is, but I know Murphy is proposing to bring that up to $400, and that's all the fees down the line are going. I don't know. It looks like they're increasing them by like orders of magnitude, like 20 times or 30 times the price that it was in the past.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And we just missed the government shutdown. I thought for sure they were going to do it, and apparently they came to some deal last night. But I was excited. I was like, wow, once again we can prove we don't need government in New Jersey. But
yeah, these government shutdowns, it feels like whether it's on the federal level or here in New Jersey. I mean, we had one last year, right?
Yep.
Right before. It was during that time when Chris Christie was caught on one of the public beaches.
Yeah.
So I mean, these government shutdowns happen all the time, and life goes on, right?
Right.
The world doesn't stop.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I always ask my guests if there are any books they recommend that all gun owners read, and it could be firearms related, liberty related, anything you think might.
Yeah, I mean, I know you probably have a fair amount of conservative listeners, so I would say the biggest differences between conservatives and libertarians tend to be views on a few different things. One would be military, the other one would be police, and I guess the last one would probably be the drug war. Conservatives, a lot of them, not all of them. I mean, there are plenty of conservatives that are anti-drug war because we've seen that the drug war has been a failure, right?
Right.
So, but most of it is that conservatives tend to be okay with big government in certain aspects that they find to be favorable, and that is national defense or offense in a lot of the cases, and that is, the police forces and the drug war and a few other issues. But those are like the main differences, whereas libertarians are kind of like, hey, the government needs to stay out of almost everything because we go from that initial axiom of self-ownership. And so we say, like, the government should not be imposing anything on us, whether it's coming from the right or the left side, right? So I think it's a very consistent philosophy, and there are two books I would recommend that kind of might be one that might be good for conservatives who are very pro-military. And I don't say that all libertarians are anti-military. Libertarians are more aggressive military, meaning that we don't have to go around and police the world. We don't have to go around and try to topple dictators and input our own rulers who are favorable to American business interests. Like most of what libertarians would believe is that, hey, if we're going to have an army, it should be for defensive purposes only. We should protect our own borders. We should protect our own sovereign land. But it is not our duty, and it should not be imposed on taxpayers that we fund, military adventurism is a good way to put it. Like you go around looking for monsters to slay all around the world, because there are plenty of monsters and there always will be monsters. But is it really should the federal government force the American taxpayer, the American citizen, to fund whatever the policymakers decide that they want to go after in the world? So a good book, just to prove that a lot of our military interventions have been, have been flawed and have been wrong-headed, is Ron Paul's book. It's called A Foreign Policy of Freedom. Now, I read this right when I was getting into Ron Paul. I think it was the first book I ever read after I heard him on a debate stage. And it's just a collection of his speeches when he was in Congress. All of his speeches that he gave on the floor of the House, where he took aim at what we were doing in foreign policy, whether it was back in Bosnia, Kosovo in the 90s, and I think in late 90s as well, he was talking about things that we were doing in the Middle East that might lead to terrorism in the future. a lot of these warnings that he gave in these speeches came to pass, and he was really able to see these foreign interventions for what they were, which was, basically that there are unintended consequences to what we do in the world. Just because we say, okay, let's go topple this leader over here. Well, you know what? It's like whack-a-mole. If you take out one leader, then a bunch of other insurgents or terrorists or people who just are now going to hate America pop up because we're over there and we're destroying, maybe their hometown, or maybe a lot of innocent civilians get killed in these things. So maybe some regular people who are just trying to live their life, maybe their brother gets killed, right? Or maybe their daughter gets injured or killed, and now you're going to radicalize people who were just waking up in the morning, going to maybe sell some fruit or sell something in a little shop and live their life. But now, like, they get radicalized against America, and probably the day before they never even knew what the United States was. And now all of a sudden you create these radical extremists who, the most evil thing in the world to them is the United States, and the only reason is because somebody dropped a bomb on their village and ended up killing some of their family or friends. So I think that law of unintended consequences is really demonstrated very well in a lot of Ron Paul's speeches in that book, A Foreign Policy of Freedom. So that's one, and I guess I'll give one more, which is more on the economic side, and it just came to my mind, so I thought I'd mention this one as well, because it does kind of go along with that unintended consequences theme, and that's Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. This is like a libertarian classic. Pretty much everyone, once you get into like the libertarian philosophy, this is one of the first things you read if you like the economic side of things. And the whole book is just literally different. Every chapter is like a different iteration of the same lesson, and that lesson is that when you interfere in the government, when the government interferes into the economy in one way or another, whether they subsidize something or whether they give welfare to people, tax and redistribute money to their different pet projects, the whole idea is that there are unintended consequences to everything, and that although you are trying to create some kind of a benefit, that is the aspect of it that's called the scene. So if you take money and you subsidize corn or sugar, okay, so now there's going to be more corn and sugar. You throw more money at something, you subsidize something, there's going to be more of it. But then there's also the unintended consequence, which is the unseen. So that money that is now getting taken from taxpayers and going toward these subsidies, you don't see where that money could have gone, where naturally the money would have went had the government not taken it from the people. So there's a lot of market distortions when the government takes money from people and puts it toward what are their pet projects, and then you never see what innovations or where the money would have went. The money could have went to some other thing where it was more needed, and the best mechanism for deciding what products are needed in the world in the market is the free market, because people make decisions, right? And when the government makes a decision on where money goes and takes it out of the individual's hands, again, we're going back to the individual because that's the whole libertarian thing. And when the individual doesn't have the right to put their money where they want, then the money doesn't go to where it is best suited, because people will pay for what they want. And if people aren't buying a lot of corn or putting a lot of money in corn, it's because that's not what they want. So the government shouldn't be taking that money and subsidizing corn. Because that's it's essentially theft. You take money from someone and you give it to somebody else. You can't do that, right, James? So why should the government be able to?
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, Tony, I thank you so much for coming on the show, and people can find you at don'twasteyourhate.com. Any other links I should throw up on the show notes page?
Yeah, don'twasteyourhate.com. Definitely check that out. I think you'll enjoy our conversations. And another one you could check out is the Libertarian Union, which can be found at libertarianunion.com. This is a group of myself and I think over maybe 10 other podcasts that are libertarian in one way or another. It's basically a podcast station. So if you go to libertarianunion.com, I think the site is under construction right now, so it's probably going to take you directly to our Facebook page. So you can find Libertarian Union on Facebook as well. And there's shows that do everything. You know, there's my show, and then there's Foreign Policy Focus by our friend Kyle, who he's always talking about foreign policy 3 days a week. Keeps you up to date on what the United States military is doing overseas. Then you have Liberty Weekly, which is a podcast about it's about a lot of different things, but Patrick is specifically a lawyer, and so he talks about the law in relation to libertarianism. So he talks about, recent Supreme Court cases and things like that. Then there's more fun ones too, like Actual Anarchy. These are my friends who do movie reviews from a libertarian perspective. And Sounds Like Liberty is Nick and Lizzie. They do a show about music, and a lot of times it's from a libertarian perspective, trying to talk about culture. So there's a lot of different shows in there, some more serious than others. But if you're ever looking for, if you need your fill, or if you're lacking in your liberty-minded podcast, just go to libertarianunion.com and you'll find a bunch there.
Great. Well, Tony, I thank you very much for being on the show, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, James. Sounds good.
Thanks for listening to Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, episode 33. If you head to our show notes page, Out of Order James Kalita /Tony, you'll find links to the Don't Waste Your Hate podcast and our sponsors. Wanted to let you guys know about an organization called Kids Safe Foundation. Kids Safe is a firearms training organization. It's a 501(c)(3). The SAFE stands for Safety Around Firearms Education. And they have a couple of different programs. They have a kids firearms safety education, a firearms safety and intro, kids firearms safety, which includes live fire, and then they also have a 22 rimfire SAFE league. So if you head over to the show notes page, outoforderjameskalita.com, you'll find links to the Kids Safe Foundation. Their URL is kids, that's plural, kidssafefoundation.org. This is Out of Order James Kalita, and we'll see you next time.